Hello, I'm Simon.
And I'm Dan.
And this is a special episode of the Wikicast, the podcast about random Wikipedia articles. Today, we are joined by a guest.
Hi, I am Annie Rowerda. I think I'm best known for running the Instagram and Twitter accounts, Depths of Wikipedia, where I unearth my favorite odd Wikipedia articles and post them to the masses.
And speaking of odd Wikipedia articles, Annie, what are we talking about this week?
We are talking about the absolute icon that is Erwin Cruz.
Incredible.
I mean, you briefed us on what this article was before we started recording, and truly, you have blown us out of the water with how good your choice of articles is. This is amazing. Who was Erwin Cruz?
Well, in short, he was a West German tourist who worked in a brewery, and he had this big plan to come to San Francisco. He wanted to see the city. It was the 70s, so maybe he had just heard of the Summer of Love or something. I don't know what it was, but he came across the Atlantic Ocean, and his plane stopped in Bangor, Maine, a very small town in the northeast of the United States. And his flight attendant said something to the effect of, like, oh, I'll see you later, because she was switching her shift. He assumed, speaking no English, that he had arrived in San Francisco, got off the plane, tried to get a taxi, goes around Bangor, Maine, and is shocked to find no Golden Gate Bridge. He's barely even finding good Chinese food, and he knew going in that San Francisco had Chinatown. So he's like, this is just so different from what I expected. Eventually, a very kind-hearted couple was able to speak German to him and say that he was indeed in Maine, not San Francisco. But he became an icon. We can talk a little bit more. I don't know off the top of my head every single thing that happened to him, but he became this first local celebrity, then national celebrity. People were so touched by his mistake that he was, a guest of honor at an Oktoberfest event sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. He was an honorary member of the local Native American tribe and Old Town Rotary Club, received keys to the city. He met Andre the Seal, a fellow local celebrity. He flew to the state capitol. He met the governor and the Secretary of State at his own request. His big request in the United States. Guess what he did? He's in the U.S. What's the big United States thing he wants to do? What do you think?
Okay, you're German. You're in the 1970s. What do you think is big about something to do with fast food?
Yes. Yup.
Amazing.
He visited McDonald's and they let him flip a hamburger.
Incredible.
He knew what he was about. I love this.
Yeah, he had his 50th birthday and they had a gala in the local McDonald's.
Incredible.
Oh, what a lovely guy. Like, he was just happy to be there.
Yeah, he got 3 marriage invitations, and in northern Maine, a couple gave him an acre of land, which he may or may not still have today. Apparently, he was paying taxes on it for years.
Wow.
I regret to inform you that he did, in fact, die in 2010, according to the top of this article. So, I doubt the land is still his.
A moment of silence, I think, for Erwin.
I think we found our spirit animal, Dan.
This is yeah. I mean, if the Wikicast podcast was ever to have a sort of mascot, we found him.
He's just bumbling along, stumbled onto a great thing and was like, great, I guess I live here now.
It's a little bit Forrest Gump. Well, we haven't even gotten to his trip to San Francisco.
So he made it to San Francisco in the end.
Right. Well, at this point, he's a celebrity. And so San Francisco needs some good PR. And World Airways offers him a free flight. And then he goes to San Francisco. He gets to... so he was reported in Time Magazine, The Associated Press, The Today Show, CBS Evening News 2 nights in a row. I don't know what was going on.
It was a slow news week.
Yeah, I guess 1977, just nothing was happening. He got keys to the city of San Francisco. He went to a Grand National Rodeo. He got presented with a white cowboy hat. The president of a brewing company presented him with a case of beer. And the owner of the brewing company, Frederick Wessinger, had said, "Oh, my great grandfather who founded this brewery did the same thing. Traveled from Germany to San Francisco, but ended up in Oregon instead."
Wow.
But that's not even on the... How does that even work? Oregon's not even on the way from Germany to San Francisco, surely.
Yeah, I don't know, especially in the 1850s. Like, are you taking a boat?
Yeah, I guess so.
Did the boat just end up in the wrong spot? If I were driving a boat, I would probably go to the wrong place. I don't know how they navigate.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're going from Germany to America, you're going across the Atlantic, ending up in the wrong ocean basin.
I mean, there's a scenic route and there's a scenic route. You know, like this is unreal.
No. So, like, San Francisco and Oregon are probably a few hundred miles apart. So San Francisco is right on the coast of the Pacific, and then if you go a couple hundred miles north.
If you're coming from Germany, you're going to come across the Atlantic. This is what I mean. Like, it's just the wrong ocean.
Yeah, I guess I don't know.
But so how did you find out about this article?
Yeah,
because you obviously know this quite well.
It was a year ago. I'll set the scene. It was a year ago in the spring. I was in the airport. It was maybe 6 a.m. I was going to Georgia for a conference, and I was with my boyfriend, and it was the crack of dawn, and we were in a really bad mood because we had just paid a really expensive cab to get to the airport. And I was on my phone and somebody messaged me, Annie, you need to read this article. And I had low expectations, but I opened it up and I started laughing out loud, and then tears were coming down my cheeks. And my boyfriend was laughing, and it really saved the day.
So I mean, this is the classic kind of thing that you post on. Actually, sorry, perhaps the few people who listen to this podcast who might not know what Depths of Wikipedia is. So what is Depths of Wikipedia?
I just post things on Wikipedia that I think are charming or funny or interesting. Some examples of things that I've posted recently. There's a photo from the cow tipping article that's captioned, "A cow lying on her side is not immobilized. She can rise whenever she chooses." Mm-hmm. I thought that was kind of really capturing the quarantine mindset. And so I posted that one. I've posted that one a few times. I just really like it. The laser Kiwi flag you might have heard of. It's this.
Yeah.
It was this submitted flag that looks like it's made in Microsoft Paint. Like it's very like a graphic design is my passion vibe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You've also posted Boops, which was actually the article we had picked by our previous guests, which is kind of an interesting bit of continuity.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh.
But I mean, are most of these things that people have sent you, are these things that you have spontaneously found, like, on your own?
It's a good mix. At this point, I have a lot of people that will send me articles, which is really fun. I always have a very fun inbox. But a good portion are still things that I stumble upon myself.
So, I mean, is it just something that you let yourself fall down these rabbit holes and just see where they take you, and eventually you'll stumble upon a bit like of gold that you save?
Well, I edit Wikipedia quite a bit, and so I think my rabbit holes look differently. They look different when I'm editing versus just reading.
Right.
Which I can't just read anymore, because now if I'm reading Wikipedia, like you can't get out of the mindset of like, oh, this fact isn't cited, or like, oh, this is kind of poorly phrased. Then you start editing, and then you're sucked even deeper into the void. So I think I do spend quite a bit of time on Wikipedia, but also, yeah, there's a bunch of launch pads too. Like the list of unusual articles just has hundreds of great ones.
And this was a lockdown project, is that correct?
Yeah, it was. Well, I was a sophomore in college at the University of Michigan, and I just started it in my room, and I didn't think it would get so big. But now it's got like 850,000 Instagram followers and 420 something on Twitter. So it's pretty crazy.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I want to ask why, but I feel like it's a question that, like, there isn't really a why to this. It's just stuff you find interesting.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. By the way, I watched a bunch of your videos around the same time of lockdown that I was making this, and I was just looking at your YouTube channel earlier today to see like, oh, which ones have I watched, and I remember you had a video about 10 books to read if you want to study physics.
Yeah.
I read a bunch of them. I had like a physics book phase. I loved it.
Because you're a neuroscience, is that right?
Yeah, in undergrad. And that's my one degree. Like I feel like I can't really call myself a neuroscientist because I haven't done very much research.
Right. But I nearly tempted you over to the side of physics.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's my request. More physics content or climate content on the Depths of Wikipedia page. But then again, I suppose it's difficult to do climate content on anything like this because the whole thing is meant to be. It's a distraction. You conceived of this as a distraction from the world in lockdown, and you want it to be escapist and not be reminded of just how dreadful parts of the world like climate change are, I guess.
Yeah, one thing that's loosely climate related is on Wikipedia. Physics related on Wikipedia is the buttered cat paradox.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you know this one, but the idea that buttered toast always lands butter side down, cats always land feet side up. What would happen if you taped buttered toast to the back of a cat?
You solve the world's energy problems.
Yeah, of course, cats have a writing reflex, so there's really no big surprise, but it's kind of charming. There's a whole article about it.
Mm.
And the other thing sorry, Dan, I've completely hogged this conversation. I'm just genuinely
not
curious.
At all. It's been fascinating.
Because the other thing which from looking at your stories and stuff like that, is you've been doing live shows, like Wikipedia live shows. Like what are they like? What do you do in them?
That's a good question. I first was contacted about doing a set in someone else's show, in 2021, and I was stumped. I was like, why are you talking to me? All I do is post. But
My life.
But eventually I was like, okay, I'm gonna create this narrative, and then I'm gonna try to match funny Wikipedia snippets and just have those going in the background. So it's kind of like the idea is funny man, serious man. So I'm kind of talking, like telling a story, and then in the background there's like Wikipedia articles that kind of color the story. That's how it started to go. But then when I had to do a whole show by myself, I was like, well, I need to switch it up, have some different acts going on. And so I've done a few different things. Like sometimes I'll play I don't want to give too much away, but I'll play like improv related games with people in the audience, or there's a lot of photos on Wikipedia that need to be taken. There's a lot of photos that aren't on Wikipedia, that should be. So
yeah,
I've taken photos for the commons in front of the audience, and sometimes it's funny trivia. So it's a little bit of everything. It's fun.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I have to admit, I didn't know. It doesn't surprise me, but I didn't know that you were actually such an active Wikipedian. Is that the right term? Like, somebody who edits and adds to Wikipedia. But of course, it makes perfect sense because you, like us, I think, you get that this is actually like a miraculous resource, and the reason to do posting like this is to shine a light on how absolutely miraculous it is that we have a completely free encyclopedia that's the most comprehensive in history.
And it's really easy to take for granted, but Wikipedia editors have been declining in number for close to a decade, and the editor base is very skewed in a lot of ways that don't represent society. It's very male. It's very like millennial Gen X, and there's some programs like Wiki Women in Red that are recruiting more female editors. There are programs like Wiki Loves Africa and Afro Crowd that try to get more representation of like just non-Europe American topics, because it started in English-speaking countries, and still there are a lot of people that argue that the non-English Wikipedias just aren't as robust. So if you're listening to this, and you see something on Wikipedia that's not quite right, definitely get your feet wet. It's sometimes intimidating. There's a lot of rules.
Yeah.
So don't just hop in and create an entire article about your grandpa. It'll get deleted, and then you might feel bad, but you shouldn't, because it's normal to have things get deleted when you're a beginner. But definitely start small, and I think it's one of the most fulfilling and meaningful hobbies. That was my elevator pitch.
No, that was going to be my next question, was how can we get into this? Because you're right, it is something that we take for granted. And I've done very, very minimal edits of stuff on Wikipedia. The one, I remember during the Libyan civil war, I did a little bit of edit because there was a news fling that had happened, and it was all over Twitter, and it wasn't on Wikipedia, but it was the announcing of a ceasefire. And I put that into the article, came back a couple of hours later, and it had been edited, but the core of what I'd written was still there. And it's an amazing feeling that you've put a layer on top of the stratigraphy of human knowledge. Like, it's a tiny
Yes.
layer, but it has actually made a difference.
Yeah, well, and it fills me with so much pride to look at the articles that I've heavily written and to see that other people have come in and improved them so much. Like, something about that teamwork, and also when you look at talk pages and like people respond to your comments, it feels so much more civil and democratic than like Twitter or like social media.
Everything does. That's why there is a flaw to human interaction, and I'm pretty sure it's twitter.com.
Yeah, well, it's great to see people that come together on this website, and the one thing that they have in common is that they want to work on this project that expands human knowledge. And I'm still fairly idealistic. There are some editors that have been in the game for 20 years and are a little bit more burnt out and pessimistic than I am. But I still sometimes look around and I'm like, okay, in the world, there are some things that are really great. You know, air, you breathe it all the time. No one hates air. Like Wikipedia, like it's the best. Even if you complain about bias on certain articles, which there are people that do, like there are some articles that I'm sure even the biggest Wikipedia hater might turn to. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, can you say any articles that you've written, or would you rather they actually stay anonymous?
Yeah, so I'm pretty open on the internet about everything, except I don't like to tell people my Wikipedia username.
Yeah.
I just like to keep it private. But I edit quite a few things that relate to where I'm from in the Midwest. And I also write a bit about internet phenomena, like trends and social media and things that are really not earth-shattering, but fairly interesting to me.
So Dan, have you edited Wikipedia?
Well, sort of. I mean, I guess I sort of have done not nearly as important, good, sort of wholesome Wikipedia editing. I'll sometimes go in and maybe sort of correct grammar and just sort of tighten up sort of bolts and things here and there in sections. And that's probably the sort of English undergraduate and classicist sort of inside me. You know, I have to sort of go in and be like, oh gosh, that's really stressing me out. Actually, there's a semicolon there, and it's being used inappropriately. You know, so I'll go in and do bits of that, and then I think certainly we can. Simon, you'll probably remember there was a bit of a phase when this podcast started, and actually. Sort of, Annie, when you were talking about the sort of reasoning behind setting up Depths of Wikipedia or thinking that was something that you wanted to do, I suppose it sort of ties in to what Simon and I were thinking when we were thinking about doing this podcast, in that we both sort of like knowing stuff, and the more inane, the better. And you know, tying into this amazing resource and trying to sort of get away from the really unfair sort of, I don't know, label Wikipedia was given, certainly at school. You know, you were always told that it's basically, you know, like, don't never cite your sources from Wikipedia, don't use Wikipedia, it's a terrible thing, and you know, it really isn't. But there was a phase in early episodes where listeners, or other readers to the podcast, would go into Wikipedia articles and make an edit saying that it was discussed on the Wikicast podcast.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember so like we had one of the episodes, I forget which number, but it was chair sculpture, which you actually went to see, Simon, which is
I visited and took a video about it.
But we were sort of scrolling through one day, and I think somebody had sent us an email saying, you do realise that somebody's edited the page and said, you know, like as a footnote, this was discussed on the Wikicast podcast with Simon and Dan.
And there have been a couple of times. There was one of our very early episodes was an academic at the University of, was it Georgia Tech or something like that?
Oh,
like
yeah.
a bursar. And one of the students had informed them that they'd been mentioned on the show, and then I think again their Wikipedia had been edited, which we are not endorsing. We just want to be very clear. We don't want people to vandalize Wikipedia, especially not on our account.
Yeah. And then somebody, I think, there is a Wikicast fan wiki that exists, which is completely ridiculous. And it's chock full of the most sort of niche knowledge of certain sort of events that have happened throughout the podcast's sort of timeline, if you like.
Whereas unlike our show, Depths of Wikipedia has its own Wikipedia article in one of the most wheels within wheels things I think I've ever seen, because the logo is all over this page. Like how because as an editor, I know that there have to be very specific requirements on when something merits getting a page. Like when did Depths of Wikipedia get its own Wikipedia page?
The page was first on English Wikipedia maybe like 2 months ago. It was actually in early April. I had a New York Times article about me like a month ago. And right after that was when the Wikipedia article was pretty robust. And it was like, you have to have a certain number of secondary sources, and the exact number is kind of variable, but a handful. And they have to be from specific places, like you can't just like write a blog post about yourself and then cite that. Like that's self-published. That doesn't count. It has to be, the Wikipedia has a list of like perennial sources. It's actually really interesting to look at because the way that Wikipedia editors determine sources' reliability is, it's like they're pretty pedantic about it. Like they'll go through and look at all like recent errors in the past recent time. And I think like as just any type of media consumer, it's a really interesting discussion to look at. And it's kind of controversial. Like Daily Mail, for example, and Fox News are no longer considered reputable sources except for in really specific instances. Anyway, I am digressing. But anyway, you have to have
That's the name of the game. That's the name of the show.
Yeah, that's literally that's why this podcast exists. It's one big sort of tangent, isn't it?
Yeah. So I had a few articles that were considered reliable, and somebody had written the article, and once it appeared, a few dozen other people started tinkering with it. And at this point, I mean, I can quick check how many, let me check the stats on it. It's been viewed. What? Okay, I just pressed the wrong button. I thought it had been viewed 9 billion times in April, but that's all of Wikipedia.
Oh, jeez. I was going to say, my God.
Enormous.
I just actually switched over to, there's a new, like a new UX change, which I'm trying to like get used to it now, but some of the buttons have moved, and it is much more difficult than I expected.
It's something that a lot of I hate this word, but I think the more accurate one is influencers. So people on YouTube and with podcasts or who stream or whatever will be extremely well known and have often their own fan Wikipedias, but are not represented on Wikipedia itself. Even people like my friend Brian, who runs a channel called Real Engineering, like he is an enormously influential science YouTuber, and yet he's apparently doesn't meet the criteria for it. So it's a bit of a weird one. Like, do you think the requirements are too stringent for Wikipedia, or is it important that they are that strict?
Okay, you're tapping into like the oldest Wikipedia debate. It's like Coke and Pepsi, Democrat, Republican, deletionist or inclusionist. Deletionists on Wikipedia are perhaps portrayed as like curmudgeonly people, like get off my lawn, like this is not notable. Because you can imagine that if you start allowing not very notable things on Wikipedia, it's a slippery slope, and pretty soon you're gonna have people writing articles about like, their sweet grandma who just simply is not worthy of a Wikipedia article. And I think like on the internet, in some ways, Wikipedia is this de facto arbiter of importance, because like you said, when you look at somebody who is really successful on Wikipedia, on YouTube, you check and say like, oh, do they have a Wikipedia article? Because that would be like, that would kind of say like, oh yes, they are indeed notable. And of course you're saying in this instance, you're surprised because it's not what you'd expect. So those are, a lot of deletionists think that, like Wikipedia should really be limited to things that are truly important, measured by how well they're covered in secondary sources. Whereas inclusionists tend to be a little bit more lenient. But in general, the thing with like influencers or internet creators, it's kind of, I mean, it's not like it's a brand new thing. Like there have been YouTubers and bloggers and internet creators for decades, as long as Wikipedia has been around. But I think that the way that they're covered in secondary sources just simply isn't the same as how other public figures like politicians or writers or sports people are covered.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more coverage. Like there's some places that are covering internet people more, but I think in general, like, I don't know, it's like really hard for me to say exactly why. And I'm sure people know more about this than I do, but in general, that's the biggest thing that is behind like internet creators being somewhat poorly represented on Wikipedia. It's just because there aren't great, like, you know, New York Times, like Washington Post sources that will talk about like these internet people.
Wikipedia isn't its own. It's more a mirror of how society views topics.
Exactly.
So it's how other stuff is being reported on that is actually the issue. That's interesting.
And that's something that's a little bit tough for new editors. Well, and I should confess, actually, I've never said this publicly. Not that it's that embarrassing. Like, this is very normal. But the first Wikipedia article I wrote, like, start to finish, was about a YouTuber. And I was citing, like, e-news, you know, like, just, like, places that are, like, fine if you're just quick checking a fact, but not, like, they don't do robust fact checking. And it was nominated for speedy deletion, and it was deleted. And I literally cried. I was, like, so just, like, embarrassed, and I was like, ugh, like, I tried so hard, but I just did not succeed. I was ready to quit. Of course I didn't, but, yeah, I think that, you know, now that I've been around for a while on Wikipedia, it's, like, I'm realizing that is so much more common than I realized. I'm just blabbing at this point. But yes, I think you're right that, you know, internet people are not very well covered on Wikipedia. And I think that part of that is just because they're not very well covered in, like, major news sources.
Yeah. Well, I mean, something that if you were to write a whole section on Wikipedia, Dan, that I think you could make huge contributions to is English choral music.
Oh, well, I thought you'd never ask.
Speeding on to the next section. What is your choral piece of the week?
And this will be my piece of the week. Drum roll, please.
You may need to explain what this is all about.
Yeah, I thought we'll just a little sort of taster. So both Simon and I sang in the University of Exeter Chapel Choir, which is an incredibly prestigious group of people who sing niche sacred music and really enjoy it. I still sort of do that in various other places now. And for some reason, we thought a good corner of this podcast, this is a podcast with many and varied corners, we would have a choral piece of the week. And my choral piece for this week, it's staring me in the face in terms of what is the most obvious, but then also it is literally staring me in the face because I have a score next to me. I have sort of somewhat foolishly agreed yesterday to sing at a concert next Saturday, where we are doing the Mozart Requiem. Now this is a piece I've never done before. I can't believe that, you know, it's an incredibly famous piece of music, but I've never done it before. Not only have I never done it before, I've been asked to be the tenor soloist for it. So I've got a week to learn the Mozart Requiem.
I didn't even know it had a tenor solo in, so that shows how much I know about it. I only know some of the famous movements.
So there's all the famous movements and chorus stuff, and then it sort of breaks out into quartet, semi-chorus.
Right, okay.
And then moments of little sort of outright solos and things. But that's what I'm doing on Saturday, and that's what I'm going to actually be doing, not this coming Saturday, but next week. So all of my time tomorrow, or a significant proportion of it, while trying to keep up with the law work that I absolutely need to get done for next week, is trying to learn this thing, because it's quite a big sing. I was listening to it in the car yesterday and suddenly sort of thought, have I made a mistake? Should I have said yes? I was slightly stressed. But yes, my choral piece of the week, the Mozart Requiem.
I mean, Annie, do you have a musical background at all?
I played piano when I was in school, and I played flute when I was in school, but once I went to university, I stopped playing.
You've never been a singer or been tempted by singing?
No, I'm definitely not a singer. Although at my last live show, I did sing a little bit, but people have to. I'm not going to give that away for free.
That's a paid extra. What did you sing? Can you at least say that?
Mozart Requiem, presumably. It's what I want to.
Do you know that song that's called "We Didn't Start the Fire"? And it's like
Billy Joel, yeah.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. And it's just
Amazing
a bunch
song.
of random news events.
Yeah, this is stuff from the 80s. You remember the 80s? Yeah, that song.
I made a version of it, but it just, instead of random news events, it's like the titles of Wikipedia articles.
Oh, cool.
And I sang it, and I flipped through the slides.
We didn't do the edit.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, it took, hours, but I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, it's like, especially if you're not like comfortable with singing normally, it is an intimidating thing to get up and sort of put yourself on the spot like that. So yeah, big respect for that.
Yeah, and quite a hard song as well, especially with those with those lyrics to then also try and change and rattle them all off. It's amazing.
Yeah, you may as well just do like the Element song by Tom Lehrer at that point.
I just sent you the lyrics.
Oh God.
It's not really beautiful, but I think the audience liked it. It was a kind of a sing-along, so that took some of the pressure off of me because I'm just not a great singer.
Series of Tubes is absolutely my favourite in that list. Series of Tubes.
The tubes are getting clogged up.
I don't know why, but those three words next to each other is just sort of funny in its own right. I don't quite know why.
Do you know where that comes from?
I've absolutely no idea.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is a crazy moment in American history, but an Alaskan politician, when he was talking about the internet, he made this he made this case to Congress that the internet was simply a series of tubes, followed by a bunch of like just absolute garbage that displayed that he had absolutely no idea how the internet worked.
Oh my God, I found the quote. It's incredible.
Go on, Dan, read it to us.
Yeah, there's a Wikipedia article titled Series of Tubes.
It's a series of tubes, and if you don't understand, those tubes can be filled, and if they are filled, when you put your message in, it gets in line, and it's going to be delayed by anyone who puts into that tube enormous amounts of material. Incredible.
Wow. This is like proto-Trumpian.
Alaskan Senator Ted Stevens. Amazing.
He's not so entirely wrong, but it's also quite clear that he's certainly not an expert about this, and to think that this is the person determining net neutrality is a little chilling.
But isn't that interesting that was like such an outlier in, what was this, 1990, did you say?
2006.
Sorry, 2006. So that's even more remarkable. In 2006, that was an outlier. And then there was a 4-year period where the president of the United States said like that on every conceivable topic and was the supreme arbiter of, in theory, like everything. And everyone just kind of got used to that, I guess. Like in a post-Trump world, that almost sounds less remarkable now because you just think, oh yeah, that's just what some politicians sound like, I guess, which isn't, terrifying.
Again, I'm devolving, but I think that I was pretty young when Trump was president. I remember when he got elected, I was 16, and I really came of age at a time when he was president, and so I had no really base of what was normal, and so it's kind of weird to look back on. Like in hindsight, I don't know. I'm just still figuring out what the Trump era even was. But I just sent you a great article, somewhat sad article. If you are a civil person, but list of nicknames used by Donald Trump on Wikipedia is just disturbingly long, and it has things from like some are kind of bad. Like this is somewhat racist to all the nicknames for COVID.
Yeah. Nancy Pelosi, Crazy Nancy, MS-13 lover, Nancy Antoinette, Nervous Nancy.
Oh my goodness! Look at all the ones for Joe Biden.
Oh yeah, of course he's got the most, yeah.
Some of them are so funny, though.
Crazy Joe Biden. You can't say that.
Some of these are just a bit lazy, let's be honest.
Yeah, like, are you kidding me? Why are we... The nickname for Justin Trudeau is Justin from Canada. Like, what?
These are amazing.
Wow. Boris Johnson is, quote, Britain Trump. Kim Jong-un is Rocket Man.
Amazing.
To be fair, I feel like there could be a whole Wikipedia article of British press nicknames for Boris Johnson, which would be equally interesting.
Maybe that's the one you should write.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, but it's like I've had ideas for videos of like, I would like, for example, to do a video analyzing what climate skeptics are saying in YouTube comments. And I know that I could do it, and I'm probably a very well positioned person to do it, but I know that pulling together all those resources will crush my soul. And I think for the same reason, going through all the coverage of Boris Johnson and all the stupid shit that he's done would just crush me.
That's like, my mom is a pediatrician, and so she's been dealing with anti-vaxxers for years because people won't want to vaccinate their kids, but she bought this book that everyone is recommending about why do anti-vaxxers refuse the vaccine? And she got 20 pages in and she was like, this is the worst. This is the worst part of my day at work. Why am I coming home and reading about this too?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually very rarely now read books about climate or climate adjacent stuff. I went through a real phase when I was writing my book that was like reading quite a lot of them. And now I just it put me off reading. It genuinely, there was like a period of about a year when I just did not really read anything because I so associated it with being miserable.
Oh no.
You, Simon, you made that clang really effortless there. Just, when
people know about me.
When I was writing my book, I was like, oh wow, it's completely effortless, amazing.
Fergus, in the edit, can you just put like a sound of an anvil dropping after I say that? But what got me out of the funk was I read some Terry Pratchett. I read The Colour of Magic, and suddenly it was like the colour went back into reading, and I've been. I tell you what, we'll go into the next corner, Dan. We'll go into Critics Corner, and we can talk about what we've been reading recently. So my thing recently is there's a more famous one, which is The Shortest History of Germany, but I've been reading The Shortest History of the Soviet Union by Sheila Fitzpatrick, which has been a fascinating book. I don't know if have either of you read any of this Shortest History series? No,
I haven't.
Because there's quite a few. There's like Shortest History of Germany, of England, of democracy, and things like that. And they're like, 200 and something pages, which obviously isn't like a very short introduction, but considering how vast the subject matter is, it's like a very condensed version. And it's been really, really good. It's a really, really interesting introduction to this political entity that I thought I knew quite a bit about, but it turns out most of my knowledge comes from Rocky IV, and so is not the most accurate in the world. But a hard recommend from me. The Shortest History of the Soviet Union. Have you been reading anything recently, Annie?
Yes, I have. I'm really on brand here, but I read this book that came out in 2009 called The Wikipedia Revolution by Andrew Lee. It's a little bit hard to get your hands on, but I did. I got it from the library and I scanned all of the pages because I didn't want to have to return it to the library, but then I graduated. So if anyone's really desperate for a passage, just hit me up. It's the best book about Wikipedia I've ever read, and it gets into the really early history, which is pretty nuts because it was created right after the .com crash, and that's the reason Jimmy Wales, the founder, says that it is a nonprofit. Wikipedia wasn't born out of some idealist mission to bring knowledge to the world necessarily. It was really just born to be like another company like Google, Yahoo, Facebook, whatever. And then because there was no more money in .com companies, they pivoted and decided, okay, what if instead of, well, first it was going to be an encyclopedia where you paid the writers, but it was called Newpedia, but then it pivoted into like, okay, what if we make Wikipedia where everyone can edit? And then it pivoted into like, what if we don't have ads and we have it supported by donors? So it gets into that history a lot, and I think it's really interesting. And then the other thing that I just started reading is The Innovators, How a Group of Hackers, Geniuses, and Geeks Created the Digital Revolution. And that is by Walter Isaacson, who wrote the Steve Jobs book.
So that's really interesting. I had no idea about that, about Wikipedia. It was almost an accidental side effect of the .com bubble was that we got the greatest encyclopedia in the history of the world. Yeah,
I'm regurgitating what I read in this book, and also Jimmy Wales, who founded Wikipedia along with someone else, Larry Sanger, he did a pretty good interview on how I built this with Guy Raz. So if you have a free hour, that's a podcast episode that I think back to often.
Oh, include a link in the show notes. Wow. God, this is Dan. You've got some living up to do here. You've really got to suggest some good media here, or Annie's just blown you out of the water.
Well, I've been getting back into reading Kazuo Ishiguro because I absolutely love his stuff, and I'm about maybe 3 chapters into The Buried Giant. Having read Clara and the Sun and Remains of the Day and a couple of others, the names of which escape me, but that's completely amazing. Aside from that, I haven't really been doing any media. I haven't really been watching anything. I've been doing a lot of reading, but it's all been for my course, which is not the most riveting of stuff to sort of recommend and talk about, but certainly I'm trying to find more time to just read for pleasure. I found, certainly while I was an undergrad and now doing this postgrad and masters, it's just when you're reading so much, I find it hard to relax by reading another thing.
Yeah.
I just want to sort of just like rest my eyes, and the primary way I relax now is just I'll go off and have a nap, which is frankly terrifying being 25 and suddenly
It's
sort
such
of
an old man.
I know, it's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. I'll get, I'll be looking at we'll be in the pub having a drink or something, and I'll be looking at the clock, listening to people have what I'm sure are very interesting conversations, but I'll be having a quiet little dialogue with myself, basically saying, yeah, it's probably going to take me about 15 minutes to walk home, which means I can actually be in bed by 7:30, and if I'm in bed by 7:30, it's completely ridiculous. And then I'll suddenly remember that I'm actually meant to be, trying to engage with friends.
You're doing that Game Grumps, the link thing, where it's like, wow, that bird's really far away.
Yeah.
Just like totally zone out of the conversation.
Exactly.
Oh God, I'm terrible for that sometimes. And to be fair, I don't think it's normally quite as old manish as what you've just described. Normally I'll be thinking about like code or writing a video or something, but sometimes I literally do. Do you ever just catch yourself and you're just like, for like 30 seconds there, I was just existing.
Yeah.
I wasn't really doing anything.
Yeah, there was nobody at home. It's just sort of if you shone a torch through my eyes, it would be a completely empty room.
Yeah, big NPC energy.
Yeah.
Like if you'd asked me, I would have recycled one of like 3 voice lines, and I would have just gone back to my idle animation.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the phrase "thinking about the immortality of the crab"?
It's a Spanish proverb, isn't it?
Yeah, I just sent you the
Yeah.
link. It has a Wikipedia article, and it's like what you're saying when your mind's wandering, when you're just completely zoned out. If someone says, "What are you thinking about?" The real answer is, "I'm thinking about nothing. There's nothing in my brain." But what you say is, "I'm thinking about the immortality of the crab."
Yep. I'm just thinking about the fact that everything evolves into crabs.
Yes, carniceration on my brain all the time.
Yeah. The crab cycle has one step, and it is crab. Like, I sometimes wonder this, though. It's like, at the end of my life, if you played me like a supercut of all the time on Earth that I spent doing all, I was just sat there gazing off like a cat, gazing off into the middle distance, thinking about the immortality of the crab. How much? What percentage of my life has it been?
Oh, man.
And then it's like, how much of my life have I spent like queuing or waiting for the microwave to go off? Like, it's probably like hours and hours of my life.
Yeah. Or doing that thing I find, this is, I don't know whether this is sort of a sign of things to come, and I am just starting the slow descent into complete madness. But I do that thing if, I might be sort of sitting down on the sofa, or, just maybe I've been reading something, I've been on my phone, and you do that thing where if there's sunlight sort of pouring in through a window and you can see those little specks and fibers and things in the air, and I just find myself staring at them. And a frankly embarrassing amount of time will pass, and then I'll suddenly sort of catch myself and go like, "What? Who even are you? What are you doing?" Like, try and contribute some way to the natural cycle of sort of like humans on this planet, rather than staring into like a middle distance with like a soft focus.
You know how in Doctor Strange there's like the astral plane?
Yeah.
It's like your consciousness was just knocked out of your body, but it just didn't do anything.
It didn't
just
at
sort
all.
of hung about.
Yeah.
What if there's like an alternate parallel universe where whenever like your other self is just absolutely in 100% grind mode, you're thinking about the immortality of the crab.
Yeah. You're sitting in a chair dribbling. That's what's going on.
Well, and the moments when you disassociate is in the other universe when they're like, where am I?
Yeah, they're like running a 100-yard dash or something, and you're sitting like a lump.
It's like you have 100% consciousness at all times, but it's 50% between the two universes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like every now and again, it just dips into one into the other or something. I like that theory.
Yeah, I think you should test that one out. Now that I have people with advanced degrees, I'm gonna give you all my terrible ideas.
That should just be like a podcast, right? Where you just get like Nobel Prize winning scientists and you get someone on to be like, I've always wondered about this. Like, could you design an experiment where? And they just have to very patiently explain, like, that we did this in the 60s. That was always what happened to me, at least. Whenever I had an idea, and it was like in atmospheric stuff, it'd like, I wonder if, and then you do like a very basic Google, and you'd be like, yeah, Soviets did this like 50 years ago, and it's always Soviet scientists.
Go one step further and just and sort of like broaden the premise of this new podcast where it's just simply asking really basic, thick questions to incredibly smart people. That would be amazing.
Isn't there that Wired series on YouTube where it gets... and it's like the 4 levels of whatever it is, like, you know, Jacob Collier explains jazz.
Jazz, yeah.
But the 4 levels were like kid, teenager, college student, Herbie Hancock.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, you know, hockey stick curve.
And fascinatingly, though, like the conversations go on, and he gets to the conversation with Herbie, and they're just looking at each other, basically going like, "Jazz is great, isn't it? Yeah, it's really good." Like, you reach such a level of concentrated sort of knowledge and ability.
But the thing is, if you were to go on a show and explain shit posting, and it was like explain shit posting to, like, you know, baby, teenager, like, you know, adult, and then professional shit poster, the final level is always going to be, yeah, just like, you know, the dog said, "I'll open this one. I don't know what's inside," or something. Like, that's the only thing that you'd say.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it just gets so abstract. The more the higher 2 people's ability are in a subject, the more abstract their conversation will always get. But in the case of posting, it's like another level.
Yeah. I feel like if you were explaining posting, the levels would be different, though. I think that you would have to, like, the most basic, like, pedantic you would have to be would be to, like, a very elderly person. At least,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking about when my grandparents ask what depths of Wikipedia is. I really struggle.
Yeah.
And
Whereas,
I'm
like,
not
a Gen
even...
Z, like a teenager, you
Yeah.
know, that's the highest level.
Yeah, I can just stare at a 15-year-old. We don't even have to say any words.
They just get it.
Yeah, they're with me.
They've been through like 5 ends of days in a dark age. They know what it's about.
Yes.
Top lad.
And you know all the drill. Oh, you know all the drill.
Nailed it, mate.
And
I was like,
you know all the
Dan,
drill.
you take this. You know what you're doing with this podcast by now. And he was just like, you know
fairness,
the drill.
I've got the right words, just in completely the wrong order.
That's an Andre.
You all know the
Prelinism.
drill. That's what I wanted to go for. You know all the drill.
Yeah, hey, Drill. How you doing? Nice to see you again.
Hey, yeah. Please make him feel welcome.
We're recording this separately, we should point out, because we didn't want to... Well, it's not that we didn't want to be weird in front of Annie, it's just that, well, because we were already doing that, we just thought it would be polite to do this section separately, rather than have her sit there and smile and nod like that gif of Kermit the Frog and Christian Bale.
Yeah, it was just, a conversation was flowing, it was all lovely, and we thought we'd just do this in post.
Do what in post, Dan? What is this? What is this drill?
Speaking of doing this in post, you all know the drill. It's that time again when we go to Patreon Corner to say enormous thank you to those who support us on Patreon. In so doing, this podcast is actually able to exist. It gives the podcast a home. Without that home, you wouldn't be able to download the bloody thing. It also pays for our wonderful editor, and there is a nice little amount of usable income accruing for Simon and myself to do lots of silly things in person. Plans are afoot, folks. We've just been talking about.
We've got a date in the calendar. We've got 2 dates in the calendar, actually, for and lots of projects that we want to film. I get the impression those are going to be 2 quite intense days, actually, Dan, because we've got about 5 or 6 video ideas to film and some Patreon exclusive stuff that we were just talking about. So there's lots of stuff to do, and we're very excited to do it.
Busy. I'd love to make a start, Simon, if I may, with the primo, the chef kiss pet of choice for this podcast, which is, of course, our top dogs. So without further ado, can I say an enormous thank
Top
you?
dogs on patreon.com/the Wikicast. Are you serious?
The very same. A huge thank you to Jay Wright, Ben McMurtry, Peter Reed, Kodzo, Colin J. Brown, Alistair Fortune, Eve Sharples, Lexi at Front Desk, Hasse Hansen, Henry VII, King of England and of France, Lord of Ireland, Aaron Jorgensen, Naf Laroque, Andrian with an N, Chan, Ben Caples, Josh Chiaga, Martin Narciso, Christian from the Alps, Amy Bonney, Lexi at Front Desk's boss, and Carl Waldrot.
Whereas I would like to thank the true premium pet supporters, those on Top Cat at patreon.com/the Wikicast, who support $5 a month and make all of this silliness possible. Those people would of course be Abu El Ella, the physics boy, Andy Hartley, Ben Dent, Colm Mansfield, Oliver Craigie, Dan Hanvey, EZ, Dame Valerie III, Nafi Iftikhar, Izzy CC, Isabella Strowski, Jean-Claude Marais, Jack, I'm sure I nailed that. Jack Easton, Princess Andromeda, Lewis Watson, Matt Maguire, Layla Medina, Nathan Flaherty, Oliver Berghardt, Omar Miranda, Simon P, Rents Kirk, Choco Cat, and Will Jenice Humphreys. Thank you so much to everybody who supports us on Patreon, whether you are correct or not. And now back to past Simon and Dan, speaking with Annie about, well, you'll just find out now. Top lad. So we've had a couple of emails in since the last time we wrote an episode. We wrote an episode? That's not the right verb.
All of this was scripted, guys. Surprise.
Yeah, all of this.
I was about to try and riff on Stan, like, since we last wrote you, we've not heard anything. But I have too small of a brain. I cannot improv that on the spot. But last time we did talk about a Netflix show called Drive to Survive. And we're recording this a little sooner than we would normally record a second episode, so we haven't had a chance to watch an episode, but I am definitely keen to watch one. Mm-hmm. We've had an email in from Tim, who has sent in an email titled Formula E instead. Do you follow Formula One at all, by the way, Annie?
No, my friends do.
Or any sport, I suppose. Let's make it a bit broader. Do you follow any sport?
Oh man, I used to follow distance running pretty closely, but in the past few months, I have not been super up on it. I didn't even watch the Boston Marathon. But my boyfriend is very into baseball, so sometimes I'll watch that with him.
No, my fiance, she was in London a couple of weeks ago, and she actually just randomly bumped into Mo Farah at the end of one of his runs.
Oh wow!
Amazing.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
But like, she sent me this message, and I was like, "Wait, what? Did you get a picture?" And she was like, "Yeah." And it turned out what she'd bumped into was like the finishing line of like the Vitality 10K in London or something. It was like this huge event. Whereas her message very much implied to me that it was like, "Yeah, I just bumped into him on the street."
The way you phrased that, she bumped into him at the end of his run, sounded like he came first, and your Pixel Girl was just coming in a close second. Oh right, yeah, like in the race.
If that had happened, I think Mo Farah would have to. He'd be running with a handicap, Dan. Let's put it like that. Pixel Girl, she's a very dedicated runner, and she's doing a half marathon soon. But I don't think she'd be offended with me if I said she's not quite at Mo Farah's pace. Because I'm not. I mean, Jesus, the guy runs a 10K in like half an hour.
He has 4 Olympic gold medals.
Yeah, he's one of the greatest Olympians of all time. I don't think my partner can run as fast. But anyway, sorry. So we were talking about Formula One based on a message last episode, and Tim is saying, what about Formula E? So Formula E season starts in a couple of days with the first race of the season in Berlin. It's basically Formula One, but instead of having internal combustion engine cars, they are electric racing cars. So the positives are you fund electric car not D&D, that's on the brain. It funds electric car R&D. Maybe it could fund I don't know what electric car D&D would even look like. Your different classes are like, Tesla or Rivian or, semi-truck, or whatever. Do you play D&D, Annie?
I am, again, you're really getting me. I don't watch Formula One. I have not played D&D.
What do you do?
I know, you should just kick me off the podcast. You should edit out all of my lines now that I've exposed myself.
It's fine. I mean, to be fair, like you just heard Dan say that in his spare time he disassociates and thinks about when he can get to bed.
In my spare time, I just switch off. You're fine.
Yeah, I don't have any time to do D&D. I've just been dissociating so much. My dissociating schedule just doesn't permit it.
Yeah, it's like the Grinch. It's like I've got dissociating at 3 p.m. I can't move that again. But anyway, so Formula E, you can go and see a race in person without spending mega dollars, and as a bonus, you don't have to breathe exhaust gases. And basically, it's like a slightly more obscure, more eco-friendly version of Formula One. So I have heard of this, and my parents actually watch it. And I know there's an interesting strategy with this because within the cars, there's like it's almost like a video game. There's like a boost feature. You can tap into an extra reserve of energy in your car, but it only happens like once per race or something. And so you have to be very strategic with when you press that button. And then I think there used to be a thing where like the audience could vote on how much extra charge different cars got, like live.
Oh, wow.
Which is just really interesting idea for a sport.
Yeah.
But anyway, Tim is saying, as well as Formula One, we should consider Formula E, and I'm all for it. Anything that's going to sort of drive forward electric vehicle uptake. Big Big fan.
Drive forward. Very good. Well done.
Ah.
Great stuff. Look at that
definitely
again.
planned.
He's a professional.
I didn't just land in Bangor, Maine. It was definitely planned.
We have another email here from Dominic. And Dominic's... Oh, here's another question for you, Annie. Dominic's talking about Warhammer. I don't suppose that you paint any miniatures.
Oh, actually, I do. I'm really big on it. No, of course I don't.
God, you gave me a second of hope then.
Dominic says, Dear Messrs. Clark and Moore, I'm sorry, Dan, this is probably going to be very boring correspondence for you. Simon, I need your help.
I'm here.
I used to collect Warhammer 40k when I was a kid and now want to get back into the hobby but have no idea where to start. Any advice on what factions to begin with would be great. Kind of tempted by Sisters of Battle, but here they're pretty difficult to paint and play. Thanks for all the laughs and chuckles you give me. 1,164 minutes last year and keep it up.
Right. This is where we cut to the 15 minutes time, and it's the Mr. Incredibles meme, just like, we get there when we get there.
One eternity later.
So, okay, basic factions that are good to paint and play for Warhammer 40,000. So just for Annie's benefit and for anybody who's listening at home, this is a tabletop.
I'm gonna start
miniatures game.
disassociating now, so you can go.
I'll be very brief. It's a tabletop miniatures game where you play as an army, that you collect the models, you assemble and paint them yourselves, and there are rules that involve rolling dice, and you can fight the armies against each other. That's basically what the game is. Within the game, there are tons of different factions that have different numbers of models and different types of models, some of which are easier to paint and easier to play with than others. If you were looking for something that is easy to begin with, I would recommend either Grey Knights or Custodes, because you don't need very many models. You need like 20 or 30 models for like a full army for them. And I think they're pretty simple to play with. If you wanted something that was a bit more like a larger model count, I mean, normal Space Marines are also quite easy to do. Orcs are really fun, and they are pretty easy to paint if you use the contrast paint line, which I highly recommend. If you want to paint stuff quickly, the contrast method works really, really well. But otherwise, the honest answer is paint the tiny toys that you think look cool. That's ultimately what they are. They're tiny toy soldiers. And so just pick the ones that you like and worry about how the rules are later down the line. But those are some recommendations for you if you were thinking of sort of the practicalities for low model count, Grey Knights and Custodes. There you go. That wasn't so bad, was it, Dan?
Amazing. That was great. As I sort of wipe the drool from my chin and start trying to remember how to function again.
Good grief. So, Annie, what have we learned today?
We learned about many things, including Erwin Cruz, the German tourist who became a celebrity in the United States in 1977. He came back to Bangor, and he was able to open the new Bangor Mall. But his third time back to Bangor, he found that he was no longer a celebrity.
Oh, wow. Way to leave a bum note for the end of the episode.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to make you too sad.
So you just left it. It's going to leave the sour taste in the mouth of everyone who's listened to the podcast.
Yeah, we started talking about something else. I don't know.
Well, we did talk about an awful lot of other stuff besides Erwin. We talked a lot about, of course, your big project, Depths of Wikipedia, and how it's legitimized posting in a way that is truly inspirational.
Well, I'm certainly not solely responsible for that. There's also some absolute amazing posters out there that are just doing the Lord's work.
I'm a professional. I've got standards.
Yes.
Dan, what else did we talk about?
I mean, I think as far as sort of tangential Wikipedia links go, this podcast absolutely sort of takes the biscuit. We did, however, discuss my choral piece of the week, Mozart Requiem, that I got to learn in a week. Which is slightly terrifying, but I'm sure that'll be fine.
I'm looking back through our DMs between us, just to sort of recap, and it's just the immortality of the crab, the list of nicknames used by Donald Trump, and rewritten lyrics to "We Didn't Start the Fire" about Wikipedia, which I feel like it kind of really accurately summarizes the past hour.
This podcast is just a series of tubes. That's what we've got to remember.
And the thing is, they're all blocked.
Yeah, yeah, every single one.
That's all for this week's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to us on your podcasting service of choice. You can like us on Facebook, and if you'd like to see our faces, check out our YouTube channel, Spongy and Electric.
Your favourite Wikipedia article, thoughts about the immortality of the crab, and other thoughts on the show can be sent to us at spongyelectric@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, Annie. Where can people find you?
Thank you. It was great to be here. If you want more Wikipedia oddities, you can follow me on TikTok, Twitter, or Instagram. Search Depths of Wikipedia. You'll probably find me. Also, if you click at the link in my bio, I have a Discord, which I recently started. It's been fun, and a newsletter, and I'm all over the place.
Online and just generally.
Yeah, maybe you'll run into me at the grocery store or something. Join us again for another tumble down the wiki rabbit hole.
And we'll see you next time.